Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Zyori podcast. And thank you for joining us here for podcast number 95. It's been a while since we've done one of these. I believe the last podcast was on April 13th, and it is bright and early here on the East Coast, 10 a.m., 6/6/2016. That's right, June 6th today, the day before the Major in Manila actually gets kicked off. We had the group stage. It went pretty well. Some exciting games, some upsets, all sorts of stuff that we're going to break into in this podcast. And then, of course, the big matches are coming up tonight. It gets started in about 12 hours, almost 12 hours exactly. 10 p.m. local for me. It's shit tier. I'm trying to see content overnight. I literally have to go nocturnal if I want to have a chance at watching it. So I think I watched about half the group stage. I made it to like 4 a.m. my time. There were a few days where I fell asleep watching the Major, woke up, and the Major was still on my TV, which is a little bit ridiculous to think about just how long those broadcast days are. Though, honestly, the group stage is always kind of like that. I feel like there's something in my teeth. Oh, and there was. That's good. I feel like the group stage is always like that. There's always that super chaotic point at the beginning of the group stage where there are 4 matches going on at the same time before like the GSL format has really kicked in. And it's almost impossible to keep up with all of the Dota that's happening. Luckily, this format funnels down, so as the day goes on, it gets a lot easier to follow. And the cool thing about that GSL format is it always ends with a really exciting match. You know, it's that kind of, it feels like a tiebreaker almost of, all right, who's going to make the cut? Who's going to be number 2? Who's going to be number 3? Who's going to the upper bracket? And who starts at the BO1 eliminations? It's unreal how different that advantage is. Starting in best of 3s, upper bracket versus best of 1, lower bracket. I think some of the times people feel like you might as well just be eliminated if you don't make top 2 in the group because it's so difficult. But a lot to talk about in this podcast. I want to talk about Overwatch a little bit. We're going to talk about just kind of the state of things, the reason why I've been absent from making content for the past 3 or 4 weeks or so. And I want to talk about this Riot solo queue thing. This whole, whatever you want to call it, is it a debacle? Is it just a bunch of people raging? But Riot has basically removed solo queue from League of Legends. There's a huge influx on the subreddit of people just coming in. League of Legends refugees, Riot has fucked up my solo queue experience, so now I'm here to play Dota. This game is so much cooler. I love Valve. Gaben, woo! And, you know, it's interesting to see, like, that max essence. It reminds me of the Heroes of Newerth days, like when Han was really becoming a shitty game, and Dota 2 was in very early beta and still a pretty shitty game. You know, remember when like Ancient Apparition was one of the best mid heroes? Wasn't really a great time for Dota 2, all right? A lot of the heroes still weren't in the game. The heroes that were still needed to be tweaked. There were a lot of weird mechanics bugs. The engine wasn't totally worked out yet. And there were a lot of Han pros that you knew they wanted to switch to Dota, but the timing to pull the trigger is tough. And it's like anytime you lose a tournament, anytime your team disbands, anytime S2 releases a patch, anytime like any event happened, you just see the Twitter all caps, lol, switching to Dota 2. Okay, thanks, BBQ Plox. You're like, all right, yeah, sure. And of course, eventually people did start to funnel to Dota 2, but it took a pretty long time. I think more of it had to do with Dota 2 being polished more so than Han getting shittier. But I want to break it down. Just I read the Trindamir blog, the CEO of Riot. I think he's the CEO of Riot right now. He's one of the founders. He's one of the top. I don't know who the CEO is, but it was interesting. I thought he made some pretty good points. Honestly, it's pretty rare that somebody that high-powered will make a post that kind of goes through the whole thought process of like, this is where we started, this is why we did this, and this is our general philosophy that got us from A to B, B to C, and where we want to be at part D. You know, that's pretty cool for this industry. It's sort of, I don't want to say the opposite of Valve, but, you know, Valve is notoriously tight-lipped about how they do things. You know, their general philosophy is pretty well known, but in specific regard to like tournaments, to individual games, Valve just kind of does stuff and announces it, and then we all react to it and deal with it, you know. So that part of it was pretty cool. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And also that I saw that thread pop up today about the guy, whoever, I guess it's Trindamir, I guess it is the CEO, posting that thing about Ice From. I'm just going to pull up the thread right now because it was weird. I love how people hate Pendragon so much that anytime his name comes up, it's, oh my God, it's actually been removed. Wow. That's surprising. Like hours ago, it was still there, but it's been deleted from the subreddit. Trindamir responded to something, and it was along the lines of Abdul parentheses Ice Frog, you know, I thought he would come out and make a statement about something, and then that was kind of it. And people were real mad about it because he supposedly released his identity, and now it's been removed. So, man, that's quite the drama. That's happening before our eyes. God damn. I love it when the different subreddits get on each other. You know, League of Legends people start coming to the Dota 2 subreddit because they want to see what's going on. And then something like that happens, and everybody from Dota goes over to the League subreddit, and then they have this thread on the front page, which is just all Dota fans shitting on the CEO and all of the decisions that they've made for the game. And it just creates this, like, toxic war of both sides just flaming the fuck out of each other. It's pretty funny to watch from a third-person perspective. You know, as an unbiased third party, it's like, honestly, I don't really give a shit. This is old drama, dude. Yeah, Pendragon, he stole some shit from Play. Yeah, I get it. Dude's an asshole. That was like 8 years ago, dude. I'm over it now. We're focusing on a different game. Dota 1 and Dota 2 were very different. Whatever. But there's still this bulk of people out there that are just so fucking mad about it that any opportunity to lay in. I saw a good meme post that was like, this is about the depth of Pendragon's sincerity. And it was like one of the automated report things, just like, we're taking action against one of the players that you reported. It's like, that's a pretty good one, I have to admit. That's I like that. I like that quite a bit. So, all right, enough about this stupid topical drama that I don't really have anything thoughtful to say. Let's talk first about Crossroads, then go into the Major, and then we're going to talk about Overwatch. I think that's probably the right trajectory for this podcast, and we'll see where that leaves us. You know, it's fun to open up to Q&A with chat. And I love the podcast having the Twitch chat overlaid as well. I can't read it and talk at the same time, but everybody loves it because you know, you think you're going to distract me. It's good. Go ham. Make those YouTube viewers wish that they watched the podcast live, because that's a difficult challenge to achieve. So, all right, Crossroads. So Dota is in kind of an interesting place right now. The majors have made the whole space much better from a viewer perspective. Right now, if you're just a casual viewer, you can sit back and you know what the big tournaments are, right? If you're someone that only puts, let's say, 5 to 10 hours a week into Dota, including watching, playing, reading guides, whatever. You work full-time, you've got a family. There's a lot of people like that in Dota. One of the biggest problems with esports in general, not just Dota, is that it's really chaotic. It's hard to follow the space, right? Let's say it's easy to follow one team. If you're like, I love Alliance, I'm going to watch every Alliance game. That's a very achievable goal. You're going to spend a lot of time watching games, but you can do it. Now, if you say, I want to watch every game in the European region, yeah, good fucking luck, dude. It's just, there's games on constantly, and you have to draw lines of which teams you want to watch, what you want to do, and it's hard to gauge which tournaments are more important, right? There was a period of time when you could just sort of look at the prize pool and say, wow, this is a $100,000 third-party tournament. Holy shit. This is the best of the best, and whoever wins this one is kind of tentatively one of the best teams around right now. But it's so infrequent that you see every top-tier team at a big LAN like that. And the majors completely solve that issue, right? Now you have this constant storyline of flowing players where you have a reigning champ that's pretty current, right? There's always this weird feeling about a team wins TI. You know, Alliance wins TI3. 7 months after that, they're still known as like the world's best team because they're holding the Aegis. You know, they get an auto invite to TI, but it's like, yeah, but so much has changed since now and then. There's been patches, there's been new builds, new teams have come out. Are they really, like, once a year almost doesn't feel like enough given that our Dota season is so long, right? So the majors have done a really good job just fixing that issue for the casual consumer. It's so much easier to watch and follow and know what's going on from a macro perspective in Dota now, right? You've got the majors to sink your teeth into. They're still a little hard to watch in the sense that it's a fuckload of coverage. Like, it's an absurd amount of games, especially like during the group stage. I mean, it's almost like qualifier syndrome where it's just like Dota overload. You know, I always love the last like 2 or 3 days of the major because it's so easy. Like, you know exactly, okay, these are the top 4 teams. If they win this one, they face this team. If they win that one, they're in the grand finals. And then whoever wins that wins the whole fucking tournament. You know, that's when it's super fun to watch. It's super easy to understand. And you have these storylines that have been created from each team. So in that sense, Dota 2 is in a really good spot, right? The majors have been getting pretty decent viewership. You compare it to Counter-Strike, and yeah, there's a gap there. You know, E-League has seen some pretty successful numbers so far on the whole Turner deal on TNT. It's interesting seeing like esports on real TV. Like, I've been getting text messages from my family members like, hey, are you aware of this thing that's on TNT right now with video games? why aren't you on TV, you idiot? What's going on? Like, listen, Counter-Strike and Dota are almost as different as it gets in terms of like esports, so I don't do that one. I do the fantasy one. But it's really cool to see not only like esports stuff being on real TV, like legit primetime broadcasting in America, and not only be like kind of received well, but have viewership. I saw some of the initial numbers that they posted, and it's like, holy shit, this is actually getting more viewership than some of the traditional sports on American TV. Some of that is because there are a lot of shitty American sports that are on TV. Like it's when you're looking at esports numbers compared to real sports numbers, you can almost always find an example of like esports blowing it way out of the water. Like I remember MLG posting that awesome stat of just like, our grand finals tournament had more viewership than the NFL draft. How about that, world? Suck on that. Esports is on the up and up. And it's like, yeah, but you're talking about like your like number one biggest, like that is grand finals Sunday for all the cards. It's all on the table. The draft is like, it's worse than preseason. Like, who watches the draft? Who gives a shit? There's going to be a list in the paper the next day of exactly which team drafted which player, when, how. Like, I mean, who gives a shit? There's a ton of other examples. I saw one that's like, well, that beat the concurrent viewership for some shitty baseball team versus this other shitty baseball team. It's like, do you know how many games American baseball teams play? Well, it was like 150 in the season or something. So many of the games are just snoozing. Who gives a fucks? E-League is going to beat that. It's still cool. I'm going on to a tangent just about, bias in, statistics reporting because, come on, there's a lot of bullshit on TV. Like, we had more viewers than Judge Judy. Great. How many people care? Not quite so many. But anyway, get back on track. The majors have changed the state of the Dota 2 scene in a lot of other ways. And one of the main ways is with third-party tournaments, right? So we founded Moonduck TV with the idea of going after that niche of mid-tier tournaments, right? And there's quite a few of them. By mid-tier, I mean like $50,000 to $100,000 prize pool. Captain's Draft is a little bit higher. It's more of kind of a premium tournament, not really a mid-tier tournament, but stuff like D2CL, for example, the Pro Dota tournament, was it Pro Global Masters? The European one, whatever the fuck it's called. It's like 50 or 60K prize pool, something like that. Those are the kind of tournaments that we are thinking, okay, there's a niche here for Moonduck to come in, maybe up the production value a little bit, cultivate some of the tier 2 and tier 3 casters that are covering that content now, pair them with some production value and create value for everyone, right? Viewers get a slightly better product, the casters get more experience and access to more hands-on resources, and those of us running Moonduck get to expand our brand and get more content and do all sorts of cool stuff that way, right? It feels very much like a win-win-win. Now, one of the contingencies of that business model is having tier 2 tournaments to sink your teeth into. And some of them are just off limits. Like Star Ladder, for example. That's a long history that BTS and Star Ladder have. I don't think Moonduck's going to be getting a Star Ladder contract anytime soon unless there's some kind of crazy fallout between those two, right? There are a lot of legacy contracts that are still in place. But it's been a real struggle to sink our teeth into that content. We've got C Kappa, not necessarily your highest tier content. It's not bad to have. I like waking up early and solo casting and farting into the microphone for some cheap lulls for $10 a game. I mean, yeah, that's kind of fun, but that's not really my end game. That's not really where we want to be. That's pretty small fry stuff. Canada Cup is a better example of mid-tier tournaments that we enjoy working with, but, pushing the envelope and getting more of those. So we have more content hours, can bring in more casters. That's kind of the whole plan, right? You can't cultivate talent without content for the talent to cast, at least not very effectively, in my opinion. So that's been part of the struggle, and honestly, a lot of the deal making that goes on in securing tournament rights, organizing tournaments of your own, doing all that stuff, that kind of negotiating, all of that is really private. All of it has to do with contracts and NDAs, and generally speaking, you shouldn't really publicly talk about financial information unless both parties have explicitly agreed that it's a good idea to talk about said financial information, right? So I find myself often stuck in this. I love doing this podcast because it's a platform to bitch about stuff that bothers me, right? But when all the stuff that's bothering me are things I can't talk about, I get stuck in this mindset of what the fuck am I going to podcast about? Am I really going to do a podcast about the news and politics and all this other crap that my core audience isn't interested in? No, these people want to hear about Dota. And there are definitely times where I just don't feel equipped to adequately comment on the current events going on in the scene. You know, a lot of the times when there's like a drama and there's some sort of like budding turmoil and Reddit's theory crafting, I know what's going on, and I can't say anything about it because if I do that, then I'm not going to know what's going on in the future. You know, if you're kind of an insider, you can't spill the beans on stuff that's going on behind the scenes a lot of the time, that whole whistleblower type kind of shit. So anyway, it gets tricky. So it's been a combination of focusing a lot on the business side of Moonduck for me. I haven't podcasted in almost a month now, and recently I've been casting a lot more with Canada Cup and CCAP, and the next 2 months, actually, Moonduck has a fair bit of content that I'm looking for. It feels good to get to cast a little bit again, you know? But definitely been taking a step back on the public-facing stuff and just trying to focus on the business development, you know, and actually find some work for all the people that are on our label and develop some new tournament content for Moonduck. So we're at a really interesting time with the company. We've had a relatively slower start than what we wanted. Obviously, losing Dota Pit was a huge blow. We've talked about it a lot in the past. That was like the tournament that we wanted to show off the whole concept of Moonduck and what we can do in a LAN environment and really up the production value, and then the whole thing kind of fell apart. So we've been kind of treading water. A lot of our individual talent have been working a lot of events, which is great. You know, it's really cool to see so many Moonduckers invited to this major. You know, Mott getting a shot on the big stage is really awesome to see. Really excited about that. And Slacks, you know, Slacks fucking interviewing people at a major. Whoever thought that would happen, right? He's actually been pretty serious and kept himself contained, and so far it's been a pretty good experience. So pumped to see what he has for the main stage. So long story short, there's just a lot of shit going on behind the scenes. There should be some fun announcements coming up. We have like 3 projects that are in the works right now that are budding and are like on the cusp of being ready for public announcement. So announcement of an announcement. I haven't been on holiday. I've actually been working on stuff behind the scenes. But to change gears, I want to focus on the major a little bit because this major is super exciting. I did get to cast some of the remote coverage. It was only 2 best of 3s, 1 for each day, but I actually got to cast 2 of the better matches. Day 1, it was a Group B match. We did the Wings versus Digital Chaos, which was really cool. Matchup that you almost never get to see, like NA teams versus Chinese teams, even though DC is, you know, partially European. I know they've got 3 Euros. But that was a really cool matchup to see how they square off. You know, Wings is such a weird team right now, where some games they look unbeatable, where you're like, holy shit, what a crazy pocket pick. I didn't understand why they drafted these heroes, but now I see it. It's really cool when teams have the ability to do that and play heroes that are not particularly popular in the meta and win with it. But the flip side of that is sometimes they play games, you look at the draft and you're like, what was the plan here, boys? Like in the DC series, they played an all-in push draft one game, and it's like, all right, so you've got Lycan, Beastmaster, Exort, Invoker, and they had something like a Witch Doctor, and they had somebody else that could push. I think I had a Dragon Knight or something, like ridiculous push. It might have been a DK instead of an Invoker, whatever. Still like basically an all-in pushing lineup. Maybe a Nature's Prophet in the off lane. 25 minutes, they've killed 2 towers. And it's like, okay, well, we lost. I mean, what was the strategy here? You guys never even tried to push. I don't understand why you picked Lycan and then you tried a team fight with him. Why didn't you just pick a team fighting character? Well, whatever. So they're an interesting team to watch. Group B, of course, ended up being pretty interesting with Na'Vi winning out completely and Secret going 0-2 overall in the series. They did take 1 game off of DC, I want to say. I actually have the results right here. No, they took 1 game off of Wings, but it was pretty rocky for Secret. That's one of the bigger storylines, I think. Secret and EG, both in the lower bracket. Day 2, I got to do the Fnatic versus Vici Reborn series. That was pretty one-sided. Fnatic seems like in a really good state. For me, Fnatic is the team to watch this tournament. Of course, they're hailing from the C region, a notoriously strange region that has 1 or 2 teams that are kind of contenders on the big arena at pretty much all times. And they have this huge flood of Tier 2 and Tier 3 teams that are all pretty good relative to each other and can take games off of one another, but in the real global arena, they're not quite up to snuff. So I'm always excited to see C teams doing well. Of course, we remember MVP Phoenix having a really good run in the Shanghai Major, so a lot of eyes on them coming into to this tournament as well. Making that run towards 4th place in Shanghai. I thought they were 3rd, but I guess it's 4th place. So it's pretty exciting stuff. You look at these groups, and there are interesting things, like Newbie, still on a complete hot streak. They won out on their group. We talked about the Group B storyline with Na'Vi and Secret. Group C ended up being pretty interesting also. I was just talking about Fnatic. Fnatic versus Alliance Game 3. That was the night where I fell asleep while the coverage was still on. I woke up in the morning, and it was Game 3, Fnatic versus Alliance, and that was probably the most one-sided game in terms of like a premier top team versus top team matchup that I've seen in a while. The final score was like 28-1, 27-1 in hero kills. I mean, it sounded like that series was pretty close until game 3 when Fnatic just completely ran away with it and dominated over Alliance. So that win is partially, I think, why I'm so hot on Fnatic. Like, that was just so convincing, so well orchestrated. They seem to be in a pretty good groove. You know, that Mushi style of drafting is working well on this patch. I think Mushi tends to shine on patches that are pretty balanced, like where the hero pool in general is pretty diverse. Like right now, there aren't many heroes that I would say are just, nope, can't pick it. Like, not many heroes are unplayable right now. There are some heroes that are definitely kind of weak. You know, like PA is a good example. She's not a strong pick by any means, but there are still lineups where she can work. You know, Huskar, similar hero. He's not picked very often, but there are a few teams that run him, and when they run him well, right? Most of the heroes are kind of in that stage. So Mushi, the mastermind that he is, the crazy drafter, you know, they still do like the Medusa mid. He played a Necrophos solo mid one of the games that I casted. It seems like they've been catching people off guard with some of their creative strategies. Now, a group that I did not get to watch any games from, Group D, LGD won out. They went 2-0 in their series. MVP Phoenix placed second, so they'll be the two going to the upper bracket. And EG Mineski in the lower bracket. Mineski, I think, not a big surprise. Most people expecting them to not do so well in that group. It's a pretty tough group. But EG, the TI champions, sitting in that bottom bracket, it could well be EG versus Secret in the lower bracket for elimination in round 3 of the lower bracket, which is actually ridiculous. You know, when we were casting the qualifiers, I think Dakota asked me one game, we were stuck in a pause. He was like, so who are you keeping your eye on? You know, who's going to look good this tournament? And I mentioned Fnatic. I was like, you know, obviously Liquid, they've been just looking good across the board. I think they're a pretty safe bet. And I pegged EG as like, I think EG are going to do it this tournament. You know, the patch has had some time. Teams have figured it out. I think PPD's done some research. I think he's got some pocket strats. And, well, apparently I was dead wrong with my prediction on that one. So either way, it's going to be a very interesting bracket. I think the opening eliminations, the round 1 best of ones, we've got Wings versus Complexity, Alliance versus Mineski, EG versus Vici Reborn, and Empire versus Secret. Honestly, I think all those opening round matches are pretty straightforward. Alliance should beat Mineski, EG should beat Vici Reborn, and Secret should definitely beat Empire, at least on paper. The Complexity Wings series, or match, I guess I should say, is going to be the really interesting one. Something about watching North American teams go up against Chinese teams is really interesting to me. I think part of it is because you just don't get to see it very often at all. That's probably one of the most infrequent matchups. Partially because this is really the first time that North America has 3 contending teams, right? So you've got DC and Complexity in the mix with EG. Complexity could make a run. Like, imagine if Complexity makes a run here and places significantly better than EG again. You know, that could be actually pretty ridiculous. You know, it's a really budding team. I think Complexity could make a run through the lower bracket here. They'd have potential to play Liquid or MVP Phoenix in round 2 of the lower bracket, so that will definitely be a tough matchup. I think the round 2 of the lower bracket is where things will get interesting. You know, we've seen the group stage. The upper bracket teams look pretty good for the most part. I think there's a clear dichotomy. That's when the upper bracket teams meet the second round of lower bracket teams, and stuff gets really interesting. So, oh, I can't wait. I'm really excited for this major. I am not prepared sleep schedule-wise, though. I'm going to have to go nocturnal. You know, Shanghai, for whatever reason, I was just a little bit checked out. Like, some tournaments you're really into. I'm just like, you know, I'm not into the storylines. You know, part of me was a little bit apathetic to Shanghai, and this event I'm really excited about. I think we're at a really interesting point in competitive Dota where, like, teams you didn't expect to do that well are really starting to shine, and some of the classic favorites are struggling. And that is always a situation that can make for really interesting storylines. We could have an underdog run for the finals. We could have a top team that started low, like, you know, Secret or EG could make a run all the way through the lower bracket and make their way back through the grand finals. That's always an exciting storyline to follow, and it makes the game so much more captivating to watch. You know, every game, EG fighting for survival. What's PPD going to do next? That's the kind of stuff that I look forward to. But it was a really nice treat to cast some of the major games. You know, for me, it's always a struggle to balance the fuck around casts with the serious casts. You know, and you really need a mixture of both. Because if you do nothing but serious Zyori Merlini analytical cast like 3 hours a day, every single day, you just start to get boring. You know, the job becomes more grindy, and it's too fucking serious, right? There's a time and a place for everything. Some games you need to be serious, and there's a lot on the line. You need to be respectful. And some games, everybody's just fucking around, and it's way better to just make some jokes. Like, one of the worst things you can do as a caster is hyper-analyze a game that doesn't really make any sense. You know, Tier 2 C games, sometimes they're just running at each other, and it's better to just make some jokes, meme it up, and, you know, captivate the audience that way, right? And you don't want to go too far in one direction or the other. Super serious casting can come off as pretty boring and make your job a little difficult if you're grinding on the day-to-day. And funny casting, well, it's fun. People like it, but... two problems. One, you can cross the line. You know, that's always a concern. Ass bags and shit. And, you know, sometimes the shtick gets a little old. Sometimes you can go cross the line in another way where there's just too much comedy, where comedy is inappropriate. You know, and on top of that, you don't want to be known as the joke caster. You know, you don't want to be known as Cyclops. That he's like, when he's in this weird casting bubble where pretty much everybody likes Cyclops. By everybody, I mean... he's obviously polarizing, and a lot of people really don't like him. But in general, there is a positive aura around Cyclops and how funny and ridiculous he is. The problem is you don't really need a joke caster at a major event or a TI, because what's a joke caster going to do? Make a bunch of lame jokes about the most serious tournament in, like, the current times of Dota? No, it doesn't fucking work, you know? So you want to ride that line of making the community happy, getting some giggles here and there, but also making sure people know that you can be serious and actually drop some analysis and decent play-by-play when you need to. So it was a good mixture of both. I felt like I was starting to swing a little too into the C Kappa, you know. I kind of wish, by the way, that tournament was not named C Kappa. First of all, everyone thinks it's a fucking Moonduck tournament, and it's not. We're not in charge of it at all. We're just hired to cast it. But because we're memers, they're memers, it says Kappa, everyone thinks, oh, you would call your tournament C Kappa. Actually, no, we wouldn't, because it's kind of a stupid, unoriginal name. But aside from that, it reinforces the goofiness. Every time I have that internal dialogue where I say to myself, is this past the line? Should I not say cunt right now? How many times did I say fuck in this broadcast? Should I tone it down a little bit? Anytime I have that thought, I would say 9 times out of 10, the voice on the other side says, nah, fuck it. It's C Kappa. Just go for it. Who's going to care? And honestly, that voice is pretty much right every single time. I don't think there's been a point yet where we've made jokes in C Kappa and anyone of notoriety has been like, Jesus, dude, you got to tone it down. This is fucking serious business. These qualifier teams don't appreciate your jokes. You're not funny. That hasn't happened yet. Maybe people are saying that and the messages just haven't been passed our way. That is totally possible. But, you know, just the name of it being C Kappa, I just think they're asking for it. They're asking for the memes. You know, they want it. They want it to happen. But it's good. It's, you know, it honestly feels good to be back casting a little bit. After I left BTS, I made that public statement that I wanted to focus less on casting and more on hosting, which was an honest and true statement. The issue with it is I underestimated by a huge margin the amount of events that would be available for hosting needs, right? There's only so many big tournaments out there that need hosts because you have to be a pretty high budget tournament to have a panel. Chances are if you're that high budget, you've probably either have a contract with a studio like ESL or BTS or Join Dota who already have an in-house host, or, you know, you've got a big enough budget that you're hiring the big boys, you know, Red Eye, Epicenter style. You know, it's just a third-party tournament that had a huge budget and said, we want to bring in the best of the best. So, you know, being like however you rank the hosts, you know, whoever the top hosts are, Shiver, Red Eye, Chobra, let's say, probably the top 3 in the Dota space. Then there's me, Coddle Guy hosts sometimes. There's Cap, who's been hosting a little bit. You know, there's like Zoe doesn't really host anymore. But, you know, whatever. Let's say I'm the 5th best host in Dota, 4th best host in Dota, whatever it is. There isn't really enough room for that many hosts. I mean, if Moonduck had a couple LANs and we needed an in-house host, yeah, sure, it's great. It's kind of what I'm on call for. But so far, the LAN count's been pretty low. So I kind of stopped casting to make space for hosting, and then hosting gigs never came after ESL New York in October of last year. So now I've, you know, spent the last 6 months kind of like, well, great. Mott is our go-to play-by-play caster. We've already basically guaranteed him all of these casts. We don't really have enough content where we need me to cast full-time. So, all right, cool, guys. I'll sign the checks. That's fun. I enjoy managing the business side of it, but it really feels good to be back casting again and waking up with a purpose. Like, all right, today we got 3 best of 1s. That's good. I'm going to take a break, eat some breakfast, and then get back into the core business stuff before Canada Cup tonight. It's been good. It's a nice mixture to get back on the mic, and there was this weird period where sometimes I think I put a little too much pressure on myself for things to be quote unquote good, where I'll have an idea for a video and then I'll start piecing it together and then sometimes too quickly pull the plug on and be like, nah, I'm not going to be able to execute it. I won't be able to get the footage, or, oh, it's going to be too hard. And then I just kind of give up, and that was kind of how I felt with this podcast, where I was just like, the content's not going to be good. I'd just rather not do it. And honestly, I think subconsciously I felt that way about my casting a little bit. Like, it doesn't go away, but you definitely get rusty when you're not grinding. You just, like, the spell names sometimes don't come quite as quick, and you stumble over player names and play-by-play, and it comes back really fast. But it's sort of like a reinvigoration of confidence when you come back and you've been stale for a while, and then you finally grind through a couple weeks and go, all right, I feel like I'm actually back in casting shape, like I'm actually ready to bring the hype, make some jokes, bring some play-by-play, and that in turn kind of makes my hosting and panels better because I have more tangible, anecdotal things to talk about, and I just kind of feel more in the zone. So really looking forward to the TI6 hub, assuming that there's going to be one. After the Manila hub, BTS seemed pretty positive about it. LD made a couple comments about how they wanted to do it for TI6. And I think the Manila hub was overall a pretty big success. It really brought all the English talent together for the first time. I should have done a podcast about the hub right afterwards, but I got kind of lazy and then just lost track of it. But it was a really cool event. It was awesome for all the English talent to really work together across studio and just focus on like awesome coverage. It was really hard to do the multitask cast stream, and might as well call it the multitask stream because that's really what it is. But I think BTS will find ways to kind of streamline that process, maybe bring in an additional producer because there was definitely kind of like a bottleneck and just mental energy in the production side because the hours are so ridiculous. Right? People don't realize how hard it is to do a 24/7 stream for like 5 or 6 days. Like, even if you have 30 people there or whatever the absurd number of talent we had, it's still a ridiculous undertaking of just constantly churning out content, keeping things going on the camera. It's a real drain on the resources and the producers and the stage managers and everyone else. Like, it takes a lot to coordinate that stuff. So I'm sure BTS will find ways to iterate, make things more efficient, come up with more creative ideas, the moistest, dankest of the memes to come out before TI6. Dude, those qualifiers are not far away. We've got ESL New York coming up. Like, this major ends like this weekend, right? It's like a week-ish. And then we have a little break. And then ESL Frankfurt is coming up on that following weekend. What is it, like the 18th and the 19th? And then after that, the following weekend is like TI6 qualifiers. So June is like the month of Dota 2, man. We've got so much cool content coming up between this major, another huge like mini major, whatever you call those big ESL tournaments now, and then right into the qualifiers for the biggest tournament of the year. And I'm looking forward to all of it. I'm actually going to be going to ESL Frankfurt, not as hired talent, but just as a spectator. It's kind of a weird story how the whole thing worked out, but basically I needed to be in Europe for other reasons around that time, so I kind of catered the trip such that it would be convenient to go to ESL Frankfurt. Once you get to Europe, it's pretty cheap to travel around, so I had first thought about, man, it's so expensive to fly to Europe for 2 days, but now I turned it into like a week trip, and then having a stop off in Germany makes a lot more sense. So I am excited for ESL Frankfurt. I might have said New York a few times by accident, but yeah, I meant to say Frankfurt coming up. Sorry, New York is still in my brain. It's the one event that I did. They are still doing ESL New York's, but not for Dota. I think they're just going to do Counter-Strike in New York. It seems like Counter-Strike's really picking up steam in North America, which is actually pretty damn cool. So, but ESL Frankfurt going to be big. I'm excited. Go to Germany, drink some beers, watch the game, hang out. It is going to be fun to go to an event like that just as a spectator. No stress, no mess, no fuss. Just hang around, network a little bit, hang out with my comrades. Meet up with some fans and just chillax. I'm excited for the cosplay stuff. They're going to do a full cosplay competition. Going to get to see that in person. Always a little sad. I was really sad that at Epicenter, they did that awesome cosplay thing, which was really well done overall. Like the way they introduced them, the way they filmed it, and the casting. Odie, Pixel, and Toby. Toby actually knows quite a bit about cosplay. I'm so sad that I wasn't at the event because I really feel like I would be a perfect caster for a cosplay competition. Sort of how Toby got all those kind of like, wow, Toby actually knows a lot about cosplay. I know a lot about cosplay, dude. I've been working with cosplayers for years. Like before I did Dota Radio, I had like a year-long stint where all I did was work with League of Legends cosplayers as a photographer, handler. Like we did a whole cosplay podcast oriented to creating like cosplay content. It was not the best podcast. I will admit the end product was kind of shitty, but the idea was worth pursuing. You know, I'm actually pretty well up on cosplay. I've been waiting my entire Dota career to be at an event where there's cosplayers and somebody's like, hey, we should do a cosplay competition. This is free content. We're not capitalized. And I can raise my hand and be like, I'm in. I know something about cosplay. I will cast it. Put me in, coach. I've been training all my life for this. They finally do it, and it's an event that I'm not at. But hey, at least Toby knew what he was talking about. I really enjoyed the He was a little bit harsh, I will admit. Cosplayers are pretty sensitive about their work, and he was pointing out some of the smallest flaws, even though they were indeed flaws. But it was really cool. And I love that tournaments are starting to realize that there is intrinsic value in connecting with hardcore community members. Like the people that are willing to build a costume and then put it on and walk around in public and dance around on the stage are badass motherfuckers. Like those are contributing community members that have small followings of themselves. Like there are a lot of people that love just the hardcore, like top tier analysis and, you know, the hardcore Dota players, but that's a minority, right? There's a fuckload of casual Dota players, that like don't fiend streams, don't know all of the top tier players that like that kind of stuff. Why do you think Fails of the Week is so fucking popular on YouTube? I'll give you a quick hint. It's not because Sunsfan and Slacks are the funniest people on the planet. That helps. That's what helped make the show popular. But fundamentally, why Fails of the Week is popular is because it connects with the casual viewer. You don't have to know shit about the pro scene. You don't have to know shit about the people casting it. You can watch those bits, hear the jokes, and go, wow, that's pretty funny. That guy fucked up. He's worse than me, and I'm terrible. You know, it gives people something to it's a type of content that allows people to connect with that feel left out of some of the hardcore stuff. You know, there are a lot of people that play Dota, think of it as a good game, but don't understand it well enough to watch a cast of the Major and understand what's going on, right? Be able to keep up with the play-by-play and the spell names and the lingo and the BKBs and the TPs and the MKBs and all the Bs and the Ds. And, you know, it's like a whole language that you have to learn before you can watch Dota, right? So I've always been a fan of anything that we can do to bring the community together, to highlight like special community contributors that help kind of create the foundation of that. Like look at Flosh, for example, right? She makes a lot of content, you know, those kind of funny pictures, the T-Saw, you know, it's like a diva from Overwatch combined with a Timbersaw. Those kind of pictures are light, fluffy content, but they're part of the community. All of that stuff helps build the hype, right? That builds the subreddit. That gives people a reason to come and look for new content. You know, a lot of people like to go on Reddit not because they want to fiend drama, but because they want to look at memes and quick pictures that'll give them a quick chuckle when they're on a 5-minute lunch break at work. You know, so there's not just one type of content that works. Even though we have a very specific demographic in our viewer base, there are a lot of pockets within that demographic of more casual viewers, more hardcore viewers, and everything in between. Old viewers, young. I've met people the age of my parents at Dota tournaments that come to watch the games unironically. I've met people a third of my age at literally 13-year-olds running around Dota tournaments just like, woohoo, I love Arteezy, woohoo. You know, like it's a pretty drastic spread across the spectrum of the 10, 12 million unique people that log into Dota every month. So having that variety of content is really good. And I think it just does a service to everyone when tournaments highlight that kind of stuff. And tournaments are realizing hey, you know what? This is actually a great way to engage our audience too. People that aren't at the event want to see what's going on at the event. They want to see these cool cosplayers. This is a way that we can connect. It's a win-win-win. Everybody gets value, baby. The tournament organizer gets more content. The cosplayers get some spotlight, and the community gets some awesome, sexy cosplayers to look at. Everybody's fucking winning, dog. That's basically what I'm getting at. So I'm pumped. I'm excited in general. Going to Europe, going to see another big Dota tournament, and then we're going to come back and get buckled in for TI6. Gar. All right, let's move on to Overwatch. Who's been playing Overwatch, man? This game's fucking awesome. You know, I'm always, as an esports entrepreneur, one of the most pretentious self-given titles I think a person can create. always mindful of what's happening in other areas of the space. Dota's not the only game that I've operated in. I started in StarCraft 2, went to Heroes of Newerth, dabbled in League a little bit, then finally found a real home in Dota 2, right? But I played World of Warcraft, played a lot of Diablo. I play a couple other games. I felt like the last few Blizzard games have been kind of underwhelming. StarCraft 2 has just been on the decline for the last 5 years. Hearthstone is... Who the fuck... I think Cinderin said it best once by saying that Hearthstone is the shittiest real esport. I get why people like playing it, but it's just such a money sink, and it's like Magic, I sort of understand because the strategy is there and it has such a built foundation. Hearthstone just feels so RNG based to me. I can't get into it. I really, it's not for me. I was skeptical about Overwatch. I was not a big TF2 player, not a big FPS guy, but honestly, I think Blizzard might have a winner here with Overwatch. The game still has a little ways to go. I'm still not completely sold on whether or not it has true esports potential. That's the ultimate question, right? Every time there's a new budding esport, that gold rush happens where the /r esports erupts and everyone's like, oh my God, Overwatch, I'm going to be the first one to make a tournament. I'm going to be the first one to do a 25,000. Everyone wants to be the first to do something. It's this race to get established. Oh, we're going to be the first Overwatch community website. It's one of them succeeds for every 9 that goes under. The influx of threads that are like, hey, everybody, I have a great idea for an esports journalistic website. We're looking for 5 to 10 volunteers. There might be paying the future, and you can blah, 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 blah. They're basically like, hey, we're going to not pay a bunch of people to make a really shitty product and then try to sell it to people and then get upset when nobody wants to buy it. That business model, for whatever reason, everyone thinks it's going to work in esports, and it almost never does. But every new game, there's this influx of people that want to try, like, hey, has anyone thought of doing an esports tournament where you charge for entries and then you can make money that way? It's like, for fuck's sake, yes, dude. We thought about that 10 years ago. It was a shitty idea then, and it's a shitty idea now. Fuck off. I don't understand where these people keep coming from with these unoriginal ideas that don't seem to have the prowess to type it into Google and see the threads that have already been opened about the exact same stupid, shitty fucking ideas. Grinds my gears. That's one of the reasons why I love the esports subreddit, by the way, /r esports. It's great. If you are an esports content creator and you ever wanted to feel better about yourself, head over to that subreddit because half of it is really good esports relevant information. I really I have a hobby of clipping articles that have really relevant esports stats. It's really interesting to see growth metrics and the different numbers people use and how data gets collected and reported. And a lot of that is on that subreddit. Really good, well-written, researched articles. And the other half is basically just listings for unpaid jobs, esports startups, and people that wrote shitty blog articles that are, quote, looking for feedback. They're just looking for an excuse to drive some traffic to their blog. But those are the best ones. And the reason I like it is because I was there 5 years ago. That was me, man. You search through that history. There are ZyoriTV. Here's another interesting article about Heroes of Newerth. Hello, /r esports. I'm sure you're going to love this one. Yeah, dude, it doesn't work. And you got to laugh at yourself and you got to laugh at the other people that fall victim to the same follies you did in your past self. It's really great shit. Anyway, back to Overwatch. It's a really fun game. It definitely has that replayability where I get a headache after playing it for a few hours because it's just fast-paced, but it's a really cool game. It has that good mix of you got some spells and also first-person shooter. Oh, you suck at aiming? Well, here you go. You can play Mercy. Just follow people around and help them do more damage. I'm a Junkrat kind of guy, not so high on the accuracy, just laying down grenades all over the place. That versatility of it is really cool, and it's a game that you can very easily play with your friends. It's a nice, quick match kind of thing. You can sit down for 15 minutes, play a match or two, be on your way before work. Dota, not a game that you can really do that, right? You play one game and you're committed for an hour of undivided, intense intention. Overwatch, you can break it up a little more, which I think is kind of nice. From an esports side, there have been a couple of budding tournaments already, especially around the launch. There was the cursed one. Oh, God, what the hell is it called? The Esports Arena, that place in SoCal. Which is also an interesting kind of phenomenon. I'm glad that place is doing well, or at least presumably. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, it might be the first esports oh God, what the fuck do they call it? Now I can't remember. It's basically like an esports building. It's like a LAN cafe that has like a little stadium so you can do esports tournaments there and stuff. And it's in SoCal. It's in Orange County. I think it's in Santa Ana or somewhere like that. And I mean, the guy opened it like he's been working on this thing for 3 or 4 years. I remember seeing the original posts in the StarCraft 2 subreddit, like before Dota 2 was even out, of him talking about the idea and the business model and sort of asking for feedback and all this kind of stuff. And I remember a lot of cynicism around the business model of like, dude, there is actually no way you're going to be able to make this whole thing profitable. Like LAN cafes in America are already struggling like crazy unless you're in a really prime time area, which to be fair, SoCal kind of is. And on top of that, like esports, I mean, it's cool. We all love it, but nobody's making money on esports. And I mean, they did a launch thing for Overwatch. They had a couple of high profile people there. So it seems pretty cool. Anyway, all this is off topic. I think the biggest thing for Overwatch is watchability, ironically, as that may be. It, of course, has a spectator mode, not dissimilar to Counter-Strike, where you can toggle through the individual, first-person view of all the players, as well as be that third-party, just moving camera that kind of floats around. You can catch stuff from afar. But it is still very hard to watch, and I'm having trouble telling if it's because I still haven't been playing the game for that long. I'm like level 32 or something, so I've played a fair bit, but it takes a really long time to very quickly say, oh yeah, Junkrat just blew him up. Like same with Dota, it takes a really long time to be able to watch a team fight and just kind of instantly understand what's going on, right? Not instead of just having like a general idea of who won the fight, which is usually pretty obvious. I think Overwatch needs better color coding of like who's on which team. There are a lot of I've watched a lot of casts where a fight is just a bunch of people on each side and just projectiles flying all over the place, and all of a sudden 2 people die, and the casters are kind of like, okay, looks like one team is pulling ahead. All right, they're going to try to get to the payload now. You're kind of, it's pretty hard to cast. Like, you can't really call quick play-by-play because it's just too hard to see what's going on. And like Counter-Strike, the play-by-play is way different because there aren't really spell names. You're just sort of talking about the shots and the positioning, and Overwatch feels a little more like there is potential for play-by-play. Like if you were talented and experienced with it enough, like with enough practice, you could probably call out spell names, at the very least ultimates, and kind of see what's going back and forth. So it is castable. For some reason, the third-party camera, to me, makes the game almost unwatchable. Like when you're watching from first-person perspective, it's a little hard to tell like which team you're watching as it jumps around. Like, oh yeah, he just killed somebody, but like, is somebody else dead? Like, was that a solo kill? Do they, it's hard to paint an accurate picture of what's presently going on in the game. Like, yeah, I saw he just got a double kill, but are all of his teammates alive? Are they dead? Like, does that double kill even really matter? Or is he about to get run up on? And every time they switch to the third-person mode, it's just like, it's literally overwhelming. It must be what people that have never watched Dota before feel like the first few games they watch, where they say, it just looks like a colorful dance party rave. Like, how the fuck can you tell what's going on? Because there's just stuff exploding everywhere. There's just 6-on-6, 12 giant characters, monkeys with shields and particles and cannons, and shit's just exploding everywhere. So I'm curious if that's going to be a bottleneck in terms of like the growth, right? With these kind of esports, the initial numbers never really matter that much. It's kind of like an IPO with a stock, right? Stock price comes out, you expect it to tank by 25% or so pretty much right away before it starts going towards its proper trajectory, whether that's upward, downward, or, somewhat stagnant. Esports do the same thing. Every video game goes through that cycle where when it comes out, the gold rush factor is there. And the gold rush refers more to like the business-minded folk on the esports side of things. But the gold rush also applies to a consumer side of it, where there's got to be a word for it. I call it the grand opening effect. When you're new and shiny, people are curious. You naturally have people's attention because they want to see what you're all about. They want to see what you do and if they're going to fit in. So games are very much like that, right? Look at Doom. They release a few trailers and everyone's like, oh my God, look at those graphics. That game looks sick. And then some more details come out. People go, okay, well, they didn't give press early access before release. That's weird. That's kind of a red flag. Okay. Well, rumors that the PvP is going to be pay to win and pay to play. Okay. Yeah, this game's getting less appealing. Okay, and it's going to be $60 for the single player. You play it one time. How much replayability does it have? Everyone gets more skeptical. The game comes out 3 days, 4 days, #1 game on Twitch. All the big streamers are playing it. Everyone's loving it. And within a week, it's like, oh yeah, that Doom game. Yep, already beat it. Already saw my favorite streamer go through it. And that's it. I'm done with Doom, and it kind of falls apart. Oatmeal stuck in my teeth. Goddamn. And that's kind of where esports differ because it's kind of a sport. It has that replayability. There's a competitive nature. New things are going to come out. New strategies will be derived. More creativity is going to flow out. And that's kind of why people watch, right? Every game that has trended upward, like that is the byproduct of good developer and community management in terms of releasing patches that keep the gameplay interesting, having a general like game concept that is, generally speaking, easy to understand, difficult to master. That's like the golden recipe for an esport because that has the replayability. That's part of why Dota is such a good esport because no game is ever the same. You're never going to have the same game that has the exact same comp, exact same lane setup, and exact same item builds on every hero. I mean, it could happen, but it doesn't really happen, right? Extreme playability. Dota is kind of hard to understand and almost impossible to master, but, it's still part of that equation where there's a big differential between the two, where Tetris is kind of like that. One of the reasons why it's a game that has survived across the ages, right? Super easy to understand, very, very fucking hard to master, to see those people playing super fast, invisible Tetris. That's a whole nother fucking level, right? So we'll see. The initial viewership for Overwatch does seem pretty promising, especially if it's an NA-based kind of demographic. Those viewers are a little more valuable. Sorry, Southeast Asia. But I think the spectator mode really has a way to go. I think if Blizzard can come out with a really robust spectator mode that makes things a little easier. Like, I found Counter-Strike way easier to watch than Overwatch. And some of that is just the nature of the graphics, like army stuff. There's just less colors and particles. It's a little more straightforward. Overwatch, there's more creativity and spells and people jumping around. So it makes sense. It should be harder to watch, but I think they can make some improvements to the spectator mode. The other thing, there's still no fucking replays. Like, the one, say what you will about Dota, in its ups and downs, the one thing that across everything else that is, I would say, is the biggest advantage to Dota is the open fucking replay system. The fact that somebody can say, hey, here's a match ID. I can go on the client, type that in, and just make it work. I can pull up that match. I can download the replay. If it's on Dota TV, I can watch the broadcast. Like that whole Dota TV replay, buy tickets to get access to games in client, open stats. That is so fucking cool. Games don't do that. No other prominent esport is as open as Dota, at least not to my knowledge, in terms of your ability to have something like that Dota, where there is just every match, the match IDs are open, public record, you can access them, you can find them, you can catalog them in a database, and you can use that data to derive more interesting data, more talking points. Like that, to me, especially as an entrepreneur, as a third-party tournament organizer, business-minded person, there's so much potential alone in that. I know Nahaz has talked about that. Why don't you switch to Counter-Strike? He's because I'm a stats guy. What stats are what am I deriving from in Counter-Strike? That's part of the fun for me in Dota is having this foundation and all of this awesome data for us to play around with. If Overwatch could do something like that, I don't think they will, because Blizzard loves private offlane replays, which is their prerogative. It's not a bad thing. You can still, at least with a replay system, even if they are local replays, you can still build a big database like that and work with tournaments and get a lot of that data in and do something similar. It's way more difficult. It requires a little more red tape and the goodwill and trust of tournament organizers and players and stuff. But that very foundation is by far one of the coolest things about the Dota space that you just don't have elsewhere. League doesn't even fucking have replays. Stuff like that is definitely tricky, but we'll see. It's exciting to have a new game, though, on the circuit that isn't a total bust. Heroes of the Storm was Blizzard's wow, this is our new esport. This game's going to be awesome. Look, we're giving people money for college. It's on ESPN 3. That game sucked. That marketing strategy sucked. That shit was a failure, honestly. You can't bottleneck a game that doesn't have competitive mechanics and just say, no, we're going to run tournaments. It's going to be competitive. It's like they tried to do it with Halo. Blizzard didn't, but, actually kind of Blizzard Activision, right? But it's like Halo versus Counter-Strike. Halo's still pretty popular. I mean, it's a fun game, but in terms of real competition, it's like Counter-Strike on a computer versus Halo with a controller. is just a world of difference. And I am not surprised at all to see that a game like Counter-Strike is the one that really floated upward in the mainstream compared to something like Halo, because it just has a different foundation. You can't just take a game and say, we're going to throw money into tournaments and that's going to make it competitive. It's like, that's not why Melee is competitive. It's Melee because the game itself has fundamental core mechanics that give it such a high skill cap that these really, really talented and experienced players can be miles ahead of other players, right? That's what makes Super Smash Bros. Melee an awesome competitive game. It's not because somebody said, hey, we're going to throw a bunch of money at this and force tournaments, right? It's like Melee is literally the polar opposite of Heroes of the Storm in that regard. So hopefully Overwatch strikes that balance a little better where they can throw some money at it, make it an esport, keep it the fuck away from ESPN3, and then, keep it a pretty cool esport. I don't know. We'll see. That hat game, though. We'll see what's going down. That about brings us to the end of this podcast, though. I don't have too much else to talk about. I was going to say more about this Riot no solo queue thing, but after all that shit, I kind of don't really care about it. It's an interesting idea. Essentially, now League of Legends has what they call dynamic queue. So they got rid of solo queue versus party queue. Now you just queue up. So you hop in with your friends, any number. If you queue as a 5v5, you'll most often be matched with another 5v5. If you're solo, I guess it's more likely that you get matched up with other solo people. But I guess the number is totally congealed now. So you have like just a dynamic MMR instead of a solo versus party. And people are really upset about it. I with all this kind of stuff, I think people overreact to things. I think experimenting is good. I worry more about the opposite of, it's always risky when you make changes. I'll make a more macroscopic comment about this whole thing. I think when we're talking about esports and maintaining big growth, you have to take some risk. And as a developer, you have to change the game. Look at Dota, right? IceFrog adding items like Octarine Core, adding Spell Vamp and cooldown reduction, things like Aether Lens, Fairy Fire, all of these new items that, 2 years ago, if somebody had posted those concepts on Reddit, I think most people would say, it's fucking stupid. Yeah, we don't need that, right? But as you experiment, as you find new ways to implement stuff, that tone kind of changes. And you need to change the state of things to keep people interested. If there were no patches in Dota and it was just the same thing, people would stop playing over time. Like, that growth wouldn't be able to maintain itself. And League is the exact same scenario. Their game has had a huge foundation of players, and they've maintained really insane growth over the 5 or 6 year lifetime of the game. It's really impressive. And they're starting to hit a wall, right? There's only so many changes you can make within this format to keep it a MOBA before you start really changing fundamental aspects of the game. And League of Legends, I think, is ahead of Dota on this curve in terms of iterations. Like they've already, I wish I had more specific examples here, but they've already have the talent trees and all of this superfluous stuff outside of the gameplay. You look at Dota and it's mostly just like gameplay. You queue up for a game and it's focused in that arena. In League, there's all this extra stuff that you can do where you're building your talents and your runes and whatever the fuck, your summoner abilities, all this extra bullshit. So what else can they add before the game becomes like World of Warcraft, where there's like 30 professions, there's all these different races, and it's just overwhelming for a new person to come in because they weren't part of that slow growth. They just see this game that has all of these features dumped on it, and you don't know what to prioritize on. How do I choose a profession out of all these? I don't know what's good anymore. So I think with that in mind, people should just be open-minded to experiments. Great example relative to Dota. I loved what Valve did with getting rid of AP and making it, Captain's Mode and random draft only for ranked for like a 3-day weekend. That is awesome. And we probably still haven't seen the fruits of their labor from that yet in terms of, I'm sure Valve was gathering a lot of data about the differences in that weekend versus normal ranked when AP is available in terms of, number of reports, complaints, active users, length of games, general feedback. There are a lot of correlations you can make between those game modes. Say, okay, so did this change make a difference? Is AP not fit for ranked? Should we get rid of these other modes and make it only AP? There are a lot of changes you can make to the basic structure of the game that keep it more interesting, It's all about opportunity cost. If you got rid of AP and made it only RD, a lot of people would be fucking pissed off and quit. And a lot of people would be like, this is awesome. This is the way my pubs should be. I'm so glad you made this change, right? The point is, you don't know until you try. And I don't think Riot should be necessarily blamed for trying something different. The dynamic group thing is bold. It could backfire. I don't fucking play the game, so I don't know how much it sucks or doesn't, like anecdotally, but I'm just speaking from like generally speaking, I think it's really important that for esports to continue growing, developers continue to experiment and find interesting ways to engage the audience. I don't know if this is going to be a way to do that or a way to not do it, but hey, you got to give them some credit for trying. That's all I want to say about the duo queue thing. Something about it just, it chaps my ass a little bit to see the really fickle League of Legenders come in, and then they're just like, all right, Dota 2 subreddit, fuck Riot, they made a bad choice, I'm all in Dota. It's just like, listen, we all know that you're not all into Dota yet, okay? We all know what's going to happen. You're tired of League. You're going to queue up 3 games of Dota. You're going to get fucking slapped around and reported. You're going to cry a little bit and decide to go back to League of Legends for a while and deal with the dynamic queue. That's what like 85% of you are going to do. And I don't fault you for it, okay? We've all been there. Maybe some of them will make the switch to Dota. So you got to plant those seeds, and then eventually the Dota seeds will blossom into trees, and the roots will take over those League of Legends roots that used to have hold of them. So, but it just, it chaps my ass a little bit to see those knee-jerk reactions like, oh my God, the game's over. It's like, all right, calm the fuck down. Are you really that nervous about your MMR? Like, what was going pro ever an option, really? Like, come on, just fucking play some pubs, enjoy the goddamn game, go have a beer, go fuck yourself and calm down. Like, we're a little too serious. It's like the 3.5K MMR people being really serious about MMR. Just like, no, this fucking matters. I'm like, dude, like, you're ahead of the curve a little bit, but like, what do you, if you were actually good, you wouldn't be 3.5K. Why don't you just focus on sitting back and having some fun instead of being all uptight about pretending that you're going to be really good at this in the future? I digress. Anyway, you got to let it go and have some fun, folks. That's what I'm going to do for the rest of my day. We got Canada Cup coming in about 6 hours' time. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Zyori Podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, it is available on iTunes, and you can find the full feed at Zyori.tv/podcast. That's where this Bad Daddy is going to be updated or uploaded and cataloged, rather. But that's it for today. Be kind to yourselves and be kind to each other. We'll see you on the next podcast.